I was just turning 13 when my world turned upside down. Everything seemed perfect until that Sunday morning when my parents called me to the living room. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, which was weird because they usually sat together. They asked me to sit in the armchair across from them, and that's when they told me they were getting divorced. I remember feeling confused because I had never seen them fight. My friend Jake's parents got divorced last year, and he told me about how they would scream at each other every night. Tom from my soccer team said when his parents split up, they wouldn't even look at each other for months. But my parents? They just sat there calmly and told me they had found other people. Mom would be moving into an apartment with her new boyfriend, while Dad's girlfriend would move into our house. They explained I could stay 1 week at each place since they'd only be living 10 minutes apart. I sat there listening to them promise me all sorts of things: new video games, trips to theme parks, my own TV, and whatever else I wanted. I wish they understood that I didn't want any of that stuff. I just wanted our family to stay together. The next few weeks were weird. Mom started packing her things into boxes, labeling everything carefully like she always did. Dad's girlfriend Sarah started bringing her stuff over before Mom had even finished moving out. Sarah had 2 sons, Kevin and Mike, who were 12 and 14. From day one, it was clear we wouldn't get along. They treated me like I was invading their space, even though this had been my house first. At Mom's new place, things weren't any better. Her boyfriend Rick had this fancy apartment with a view of the city, but he made me feel like I was interrupting their perfect life every time I stayed over. Within 2 months, Mom announced she was pregnant. They would act like teenagers in love right in front of me, holding hands and kissing, which made me really uncomfortable. Sometimes they'd whisper and laugh while looking at me, making me feel like I was some kind of problem they had to deal with. My only escape was my godmother, Dad's older sister. She lived alone in a small house with a beautiful garden where she ran a plant nursery. She was different from my parents. She actually listened when I talked, and she never made me feel like I was in the way. I started spending more and more time there, helping her with the plants after school and doing small jobs around the house. At first, it was just occasional visits. I'd go there after school when I didn't want to deal with Kevin and Mike at Dad's house, or when Mom and Rick were being too much to handle. My godmother would let me help her repot plants or water the seedlings. She taught me about different types of flowers and how to take care of them. We would have dinner together, and she would ask me about school, my friends, and what I wanted to do when I grew up. She made me feel wanted. Before I knew it, I was spending most of my time at her place. I would tell Dad I was at Mom's, and tell Mom I was at Dad's. Neither of them checked. It took them 3 whole months to realize I had moved in with my godmother permanently. 3 months where they didn't once call to check where I actually was. They were so busy with their new families that they didn't even notice I wasn't around. Dad used to send money to my godmother for my expenses at first, but he started forgetting about it. Sometimes my godmother would remind him, but often she'd just cover everything herself. I felt bad about this, so I started working harder at the nursery to earn my keep. I would get up early before school to help water the plants, and stay late to help with inventory and cleaning up. On weekends, I would help customers pick out plants and carry heavy bags of soil to their cars. My parents even started forgetting my birthdays. When I turned 14, neither of them called until my godmother reminded them. When I got sick with the flu that winter, she called them both, but they were too busy to visit. Mom said Rick's daughter was visiting that weekend, and Dad said he had promised to take Kevin and Mike to a basketball game. The worst was my high school graduation. My godmother called them both a month before to remind them about the date. They both promised they would come. On the day of the ceremony, I kept looking at the entrance, hoping to see them walk in. But the only person who showed up was my godmother. She sat in the front row, took pictures, and cheered louder than anyone else when I got my diploma. Later, Mom texted saying Rick's daughter had a dance recital that day, and Dad called saying Sarah's parents had surprised them with a visit. Eventually, I stopped answering their calls. When they did manage to get through, it was always the same. Empty apologies and promises to do better. They blamed me for being rude and distant, but I was just tired of their excuses. I focused on my studies and got into a good college a few hours away. I moved into the dorms but visited my godmother regularly because she was my real family now. 3 months ago, my grandfather passed away. He owned a big farm and had quite a bit of money saved up. Everyone showed up for the reading of his will. Dad and his brothers hadn't visited Grandpa in years, but they sure were quick to show up when there was money involved. But Grandpa left everything to my godmother: the farm, the house, and $1 million. The rest went to charity. This made perfect sense because my godmother was the only one who took care of him when he was sick. She would drive out to the farm every weekend to check on him, while everyone else was too busy to visit. A week later, my godmother called me home. She told me she was giving me the $1 million my grandfather had left her. She remembered all those times I talked about wanting to start my own business, and she wanted me to use the money to follow my dreams. I hugged her and cried. She had been more of a parent to me than my actual parents ever were. As soon as word got out about the money, my parents suddenly remembered they had a son. They started calling regularly, checking on me, and acting like they had always been there. Dad even showed up at my dorm last week. Of course, he got my address from my godmother. He started talking about how proud he was that I was graduating soon and tried to convince me to visit his house. When I asked him when was the last time he called me before this, he had no answer. Mom left me a voicemail saying she was excited about my graduation and expected an invitation. She said both she and Dad had always dreamed of seeing me graduate from college. The same parents who couldn't make time for my high school graduation now suddenly want to be part of my college graduation. I don't want either of them there. When I told my godmother about this, she said it was my choice but suggested I give them another chance. She's always been the forgiving type. Maybe that's why she's the only one Grandpa trusted with his money. But I honestly don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe they genuinely care about my graduation, but another part knows they're only back because of the money. It's hard to forget all those years they acted like I didn't exist. Things got more complicated after my college graduation. I ended up not telling my parents about the ceremony date. I got 2 extra tickets just in case they somehow found out and showed up, but they never did. My godmother was there, just like she had been for my high school graduation. We went out for dinner afterward, and she told me how proud she was. It felt right. She was the one who had been there for me all these years. Almost a month passed after graduation, and neither of my parents called to ask about it. This proved what I had suspected. All their talk about wanting to be there for my big day was just empty words. But then, out of nowhere, Mom called me. I thought maybe she was finally asking about graduation, but no. She had a completely different agenda. Your sister just finished primary school, she said, like we had been in touch all this time. We're planning to put her in this really good private school, but we're a bit short on money right now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was talking about her other daughter, the one I had never even met, and calling her my sister. Before I could say anything, she continued, "We know your godmother gave you that inheritance money. Your sister needs you to step up as her big brother." My head was spinning. After years of not being there for me, she was asking me to pay for her other kids' education. "I've never even met this sister you're talking about," I said. "Where were you when I needed my mom? When I was sick? When I graduated?" She started crying on the phone, saying I was stuck in the past and needed to move on. "You have all this money now," she said. "What better way to use it than helping your sister get a good education?" I wanted to laugh. I had my own student loans to pay off, and here she was, asking me to fund a private school for a kid I'd never met. I told her I had my own plans for the money and couldn't spare any. She hung up without even asking about my graduation. I was still processing this when things got even more bizarre. I got a call from a bank saying I needed to pay for Dad's defaulted mortgage. They said he had given them my number because he couldn't make the payments anymore. At first, I panicked. I didn't know if I was legally responsible for his debts just because I was his son. I called my friend Alex, who was in his final year of law school. He told me I wasn't legally obligated to pay anything. The bank could try to collect from anyone willing to pay on Dad's behalf, but I had every right to refuse. This made me feel better, but I was angry that Dad had dragged me into his financial problems without even talking to me first. The bank called again a week later, their tone more aggressive this time. But now that I knew my rights, I stood my ground. I told them to stop harassing me and to deal directly with the person who took out the loan. They apologized and hung up. A few hours later, Dad's wife called me, yelling about how the bank officers had gotten rough with Dad because of what I said to them. "Don't you care about your father at all?" she screamed. "He's struggling to pay the mortgage, and you're just sitting there with all that money." I reminded her that Dad had never cared much about my struggles. "He has you and your boys to help him," I said. "Why don't you chip in?" She hung up on me. That night, Dad called. He was drunk and emotional, apologizing for everything. He said he knew he hadn't been a good father, that he had always put his stepsons first, and that he wanted to make things right. But all I could think about was how he never called me until he found out I had money. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," I told him. "I learned to live without you, and that's how I want to keep it." He kept pleading, but I stood firm. Later that night, I lay in bed wondering if I was being too harsh. Maybe I should have helped with the mortgage, just for a couple of months. But then I remembered all the times I needed him, and he chose his new family instead. I remembered sitting alone in my room at his house while he took his stepsons fishing. I remembered all the next times that never came. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, I got an email from Mom inviting me to dinner. She wrote that since they missed my graduation, they wanted to make it up to me. She suggested dinner with just the three of us, like old times. I wasn't interested in pretending we were still a happy family, but I accepted anyway. I wanted to see what they were really after. The dinner started with the same script Dad had used before. Sorry, remorse, forgiveness, family. I just nodded along, waiting for them to get to the real point. Sure enough, Mom eventually asked about my plans for the money. She said she and Dad could give me investment advice, like I was still a kid who couldn't make his own decisions. Then she brought up Dad's mortgage problems. Before I could respond, she jumped into her master plan. I should pay off Dad's mortgage for his stepson's college loans and give her money for my half-sister's private school. They'll pay you back when they're older and working, she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I looked at both of them sitting there, acting like they had any right to tell me what to do with my money. They knew I had my own student loans to pay off, but they didn't care. All they saw was a chance to solve their financial problems using my inheritance. How about we just finish our dinner quietly? I suggested. Mom lost it at that point, yelling that I was still the same selfish, attention-seeking kid I'd always been. I could have argued back, could have listed all the ways they had failed me as parents, but what was the point? You're right, I said, standing up. I am selfish. I'm selfish enough to keep my money for my own future instead of giving it to people who never cared about me. I dropped enough cash on the table to cover my share of the dinner and walked out. As I drove home that night, I felt strangely peaceful. Yes, they had only come back into my life because of the money, but at least now I knew for sure. There was no more wondering if they really cared, no more hoping they might change. They had shown their true colors, and in a way, that was a gift. The next few weeks were quiet. No calls from Mom or Dad, no more bank notices. I focused on my new job at a tech company and started making plans for my future. The inheritance money sat untouched in my account while I figured out exactly what I wanted to do with it. My godmother called regularly to check on me. She never pressured me about my parents or the money, just asked about my work and if I was eating properly. During one of our calls, she mentioned that Dad had come to see her. He asked about you, she said. Wanted to know if you were really planning to start a business. I knew what that meant. He was trying to figure out if I was actually going to use the money or if there was still a chance he could get some. What did you tell him? The truth, she said, that it's your money and your decision. He didn't like that much. A few days later, Mom tried a different approach. She sent me photos from when I was little, family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Along with the photos came a message about how we used to be such a happy family and how we could be that way again. But all I could think about was how those happy moments in the photos ended the moment they found their new partners. Then came the group messages. Both Mom and Dad started adding me to family group chats. Dad's included his wife and stepsons, while Mom's had her husband and my half-sister. They shared photos of their daily lives, talked about weekend plans, sent birthday wishes to each other. It was like they were trying to show me what I was missing out on. I left both groups without saying anything. The next day, Dad's wife messaged me directly, saying I had hurt everyone's feelings by leaving the groups. She said they were all trying to include me in the family, and I was being difficult. I blocked her number. Mom's husband tried next. He sent this long message about how he had always thought of me as his own son, despite barely talking to me all these years, and how his daughter, my half-sister, really looked up to me, even though we'd never met. He said they were struggling with school fees, and it was sad that I wouldn't help my own family. I was getting tired of all this. Every time I thought they had given up, they found a new way to try to guilt me into giving them money. The worst part was, they weren't even hiding it anymore. It was always about the money. One Saturday morning, both my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. My godmother must have given them my address again, probably hoping we could work things out. They said they wanted to talk, just the three of us. We've been thinking, Mom started, about how we could make this work for everyone. Dad jumped in with their new plan. If I helped them out now, they would pay me back by selling the farm they thought they would inherit from Grandpa. They had already found a buyer interested in the land. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The farm isn't yours to sell, I said. Grandpa left it to my godmother. She's not going to live forever, Mom said, like it was the most natural thing in the world to talk about inheriting from someone who was still alive. And you're her favorite. You'll get everything anyway. That was it. I'd had enough. Get out, I said. Both of you. They tried to argue, but I was done listening. You didn't want me when I needed parents. You didn't care about me when I had nothing. Now you want to pretend we're family because I have money? Get out of my apartment and my life. After they left, I called my godmother. I told her everything, including their plan about the farm. She laughed, actually laughed. You know what's funny? She said. I already sold the farm last week. I'm using the money to expand the plant nursery. I was going to tell you this weekend. I want you to be my business partner. I sat there, stunned. Business partner? Why not? You practically ran the place when you were in high school. You know everything about the business. With the money from the farm sale and your inheritance, we could make it something really special. But only if that's what you want. And just like that, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The next day, I handed in my notice at work. A month later, my godmother and I were planning the expansion of the nursery. We decided to add a cafe area where people could sit among the plants and a section for gardening classes. Mom and Dad still try to contact me sometimes. They send birthday cards with notes about how much they miss me. Dad's wife posts on social media about how sad it is when money tears families apart. Mom's husband tells mutual friends that I abandoned my little sister. But I know I made the right choice. Real family isn't about DNA or obligation. It's not about who comes around when you have something they want. It's about who's there when you have nothing to offer except yourself. The nursery is doing great. We're actually planning to open a second location next year. My godmother is teaching me everything she knows about running the business, and I'm bringing in new ideas about online sales and social media marketing. We make a good team. Sometimes customers ask if she's my mom. We just smile and don't correct them. After all, she's been more of a parent to me than my real parents ever were. And that's what really matters. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.